Babe, can you hurry up?
I can't figure out how to buckle this thing.
We're going like 3 miles. Who cares?
All right,
Leave
fine.
it.
What are you doing?
It's dry shampoo. Do you think I have time to shower?
Why do you need that? Just wake up earlier.
Oh, maybe if you'd help me with the kids, I could bathe.
I do everything in this house.
Babe, give me that
seatbelt thing drives me crazy. It gives me a headache. Can you buckle up, please?
Okay, maybe if you would do your job, I wouldn't have to.
Mom, Dylan's mad.
Why?
Why is he mad?
Because he lost his Triceratops.
Triceratops aren't even in
They're
the
not
Bible.
in the Bible.
Okay,
They don't
we learned
exist.
creation.
Here, put some of this under your eyes. Did you not get any sleep?
I got plenty of sleep. I'm fine. What?
Daddy stayed up playing poker.
Okay, enough. Play with the Barbies.
Can you please learn how to drive?
Listen, do your makeup at the house.
I don't have time. What is this, chocolate or poop? Baby, I'm trying to put my lipstick on. If you could put...
He's learning about David and Goliath. Just let him shoot, okay?
Throw that gun up there.
Mom, Dylan wants to watch videos on Dad's phone.
Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie. Tell Dylan that Daddy's texting and driving, and he can't
listen,
use it.
I'm navigating, all right? I'm on the GPS.
Okay, maybe if you went to church more, you wouldn't have to look up where it is. Can you stop hitting your brother, please?
I promise you, if I have to pull this car over, these spankings are about to be deep and wide. If your mother didn't have so many headaches at night, then maybe I wouldn't be such an irritable mood. Get control of your family.
Can you get control of the steering wheel, please? How long has this coffee been in here?
I don't know, since last weekend.
I don't care.
You're in charge of the kids.
Oh, I'm in charge of the kids?
I don't know. Wives, submit to your husbands. Ever read that verse?
You ever heard the song, It Takes Two to Make a Thing Go Right?
That's not a Bible verse.
Sorry, kids. It sounds like Daddy needs a little NAPTIME.
Okay, maybe Mommy needs some MERLOT again.
Where is Barbie?
Barbie's staying at home today.
Okay, maybe Barbie stayed at home because she put on her makeup at the house.
Maybe Barbie needs a new kin. But please, can I have that?
Look at that. And you would have another baby?
Oh,
We're not
guys,
going to the playground!
Quiet. I can't handle it. We are going to church.
Well, I hope the sermon series is on patience today.
Okay, what?
You need it.
Come on, where is it?
Can you give me that?
playground!
We're not... Okay, if you guys can act good for just 2 hours, we'll take you to Pizza Hut after church, okay?
Did you just bribe our children?
It's the only thing that works. We're about to go into church. Will you put your phone on silent?
Okay, maybe you should put your voice on silent. Honestly.
Okay.
Hey, we're like 15 minutes late to church.
Should we just act like visitors and park in the front?
I don't know. We got to put on our flashers for that.
Should we just drop the kids off and go to lunch?
Can we even do that?
We tithe enough. We should be.
Mom, Dylan said he has to pee.
Let him pee in his pants. I don't care.
We have the diaper bag, sweetie. It's the church nursery's problem. No, we're not watching Moana on the way to church.
On the way to church, it's always VeggieTales. On the way home, you can watch whatever you want.
We literally don't care.
Why on the way to church is it always VeggieTales?
It's Christian.
Well, hi there and welcome to church, Bathielum Church. It is great to see you. You are so welcome as we gather together today. I don't know what kind of week you've had, but this week has been pretty mental as we look across the Atlantic to Washington, to the seat of probably the greatest superpower, and we see people storming the Capitol building. And also across our globe, coronavirus cases are at an all-time high. And here in the UK, we're at the end of the first week of the third national lockdown. And things seem to be going a little awry. And, you know, we met together this week for prayer as we do every week early morning. And we just get a sense of being overwhelmed. It was the day after the American thing had happened. And we're a little bit overwhelmed. But we were reminded that our job is not to work out the mechanics of prayer. Our job is to come and to pray. God will work out the rest. He just asks us to come. And he also asks us to recalibrate our thinking in that matter. And today we're going to take opportunity to rest and to recalibrate. And to help us do this, I had the great opportunity of meeting up online with a good friend of mine, Andy Percey, who wrote this book, Infused with Life, Exploring God's Gift of Rest in a World of Busyness. And at the time that he wrote that, we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic and political upheaval. But what he has to share in the interview is really a word in season. So I would encourage you to stick around for that. We've also got our very own Grace, who's coming to give us a word on prayer, and we've got some worship as well. But let me start off by reading a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. The Apostle Paul asks us to shift our thinking. He says this from verse 26. Remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes, or powerful or wealthy when God called you. Instead, God deliberately chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. He chose those who are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important, so that no one can ever boast in the presence of God. Let's worship together.
Good morning, church. Hope you're doing okay. Let's worship together. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. Let your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise at your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Yeah. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. Let your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise at your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. At your breath in our lungs, God, we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise at your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Yeah. Pour out our praise to you, God. Pour out our praise to you, God. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Yes, all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth, yeah. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. your breath in our lungs. God, we pour out our praise, pour out our praise at your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only, yeah. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord. So worthy of our praise, worthy of our praise. Great are you, Lord. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Thank you, Lord.
God, I look to you, I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you, you're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom, you know just what to do, yeah. God, I look to you, I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you, you're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom, you know just what to do. And I will love you, Lord, my strength. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days I will love you, God. And I will love you, Lord, my strength. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days I will love you, God. Oh, oh. And hallelujah, our God reigns. And hallelujah, our God reigns. And hallelujah, our God reigns. Forever all my days, hallelujah. And hallelujah, our God reigns. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days I will love you, God.
Lord, teach me to pray. I remember saying these words after my baptism. It was not because I didn't know how to pray. I said it because back then I didn't spend much time in prayer. I didn't make time for my prayer in my daily life. I was always too busy. Back then, I prayed when I needed something. I prayed when things were going wrong. I prayed when someone asked me to pray. You see the pattern. My prayer life was very selfish. I needed to make some big changes. Lord, teach me to pray. And he did, because God is faithful. 2 Timothy 2 verse 13 says, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself, because God keeps his promises. 1 Timothy 4, for physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both present life and the life to come, because God loves us. John 3:13, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. I found it challenging. I made excuses for missing my prayer time. I let life creep back in from time to time. But God is patient. He kept pace with me, and I slowly changed my ways, and my prayer life changed too. I learned prayer is not just the morning and evening ritual I grew up with. It's not just asking, but praising and thanksgiving. It's talking with God when I didn't feel like talking with anybody else. It's through prayer that I learned to grow and purposely move forward with God. I could pray in places other than my bedroom, with my eyes open or closed. You could say I found a new rhythm. Richard Foster wrote, it is our hope that as we lean into the rhythms that are the pathways to a connection with Christ, we will experience communion and intimacy with Him. In doing so, it fuels and sustains our ability to live from the rest that we have discovered. I had found my rest in the Lord. Lord, teach me to pray. After all, I'm still learning.
Okay, well, hi everyone, and you will notice that I'm joined on the screen by Andy Percey. Andy is a really good friend of mine, also a minister in Bath at Manvers Street in Bath. Andy, do you want to just start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll introduce why we're here today.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Andy, as Kenny said. I am married to Bex, and we have a 5-year-old son called Leo, and we've lived in the city of Bath for about 6 years, and I'm the pastor down at Manvers Street Baptist Church in the city centre. Really blessed to be here in the city at this time, and with good people, good friends like Kenny and Sharon and others as well. So it's great to be able to hook up with you today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for taking this time. Today, our conversation is really about your other hat that you wear. Andy wears a lot of hats: pastor, father, dog owner, husband, and also an author. Andy, we're going to talk about I think it's your second book of a whole plethora of books.
I'm just about to, next month, the third one is coming out, and I'm writing the fourth at the moment. So, yeah.
Wow. Do you have time to breathe in the day? Well, no. Ironically, the book that we're talking about is this one here. It's called Infused with Life, Exploring God's Gift of Rest in a World of Business. And we sold this at the church last year. There was a great uptake. A lot of people took it, and I've no doubt read it. And you and I have been wanting to catch up properly like this to discuss this book for a while. So now it's happening. So first of all, Andy, why the title, Infused with Life? I've got my favourite brew here. Infused with Life, Exploring God's Gift of Rest in a World of Business.
Yeah, no.
Why did you come up?
Yeah, that title. It's I think I told a little bit of the story in the book, how when I was having a cup of tea, which is rare for me these days. I usually drink coffee.
Or hot chocolate. You had a hot chocolate last time we met up.
Yeah, that's increased as well. So other beverages are available. But I was having a cup of tea in a local coffee shop here, and they had this really cool thing where when you ordered a cup of tea, they'd bring you the tea in a teapot, but with like a digital timer, which was kind of counting down from like 3.5 minutes, which was like the optimal brewing time for a cup of tea. Because with a tea bag, when you put the tea in, you need to allow the tea to infuse the water. I think that's the technical term. And the longer you leave it in there, of course, the more you get this sense of infusion where the water takes on the flavor of the tea. And I was thinking about this whole concept of rest and that the book is dealing with, and this concept of just allowing, as it were, God's presence to infuse us. That takes time and that takes intention. And so that seemed to be, as I was thinking about that analogy and thinking about, what the title could be, a good title to call the book. It's sufficiently kind of weird and vibey enough that you think, what's all that about? And it might make you want to read a bit
off the shelf.
Yeah.
Well, we'll give you details actually at the end as to how you can get a hold of Andy's book. And I really, really would, and it's not just because I'm talking to Andy on the screen, I say this privately as well, is that Andy just got a really, really good way of writing. This book has got enough theological beef to get your teeth wrapped around, but it's also really super practical. So Andy, this whole issue of rest, and in particular Sabbath rest, which you bring out a lot in the book, could you just explain? And I feel it's one of those ones where you spend probably months and months and months toiling over writing a book, and someone asks you to quantify it in a few moments. Probably no end of frustrations, but talk to us about Sabbath rest. What does that mean? What does that look like, or what should that look like?
I mean, I think it's the challenge is, and we've talked a little bit about this, is that it's very easy for us to think about Sabbath as a day. If you were Jewish, you'd define it as the sort of sun setting on the Friday through to the sun setting on the Saturday. That's your Sabbath period. For Christians, we tend to traditionally think of that as a Sunday. But what if Sabbath is more than simply a period of time? What if it's a reality that we can live within? What if it is a gift that God has given us, not simply that we can cram into this 24-hour period? So, you work like a dog for 6 days of the week, and then you spend one day of the week sort of led on your sofa, kind of trying to recover from that pattern, only to jump straight back into the 6 days of working like a dog again. What if it's more than that? What if it was always meant to be more than that? And that's kind of what I explore a little bit in the book, is saying that so often we get caught up in these patterns of work and recovery. And for so many people, Sabbath is simply a means to recover from their activity. But actually that pattern of working relentlessly and then recovering isn't one that breaks. They kind of go through that time and time again. And is that really the best that God has for us.
It's interesting you talk about the best
Yeah.
of it, because, you know, like anything, I guess it's like a spectrum. You know, you've got people who, on one side, you know, will see it as, you know, their day to binge on Netflix. You know, they've given
Yeah.
all out in the 6 days and they just sit and vegetate.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you've got, I guess, the legalists, you know, people who, and, you know, you bring this out in the book as well, you know, the Pharisees were a little bit like that, in the sense that, you know, they make more of it than what it actually should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, God is calling us back to a purity of the Sabbath, isn't he?
I think so, and I think there's, like you say, there's a challenge with certainly the kind of literalists who would look at the Sabbath and define it. And the Pharisees did this, where they almost said, well, Sabbath is a lack of work. Okay, well, what do we define as work? And they came up with this whole list of stuff. But then you look at it and go, well, what can I do on this day? And you're sat there almost feeling like I've got to get through this now. It becomes a burden. And some people feel like that, you know, or it can feel like that for some people if you get a very strict interpretation, because you're sat there thinking, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't go to the shop. And there are people, you know, my previous church, I remember going to buy some food at Sainsbury's on a Sunday, and you'd see people from your congregation there, and they'd almost sort of try and hide behind the fruit and veg because they didn't want you to see them in the shop on a Sunday, because they thought, oh no, I shouldn't be here. So that there is this kind of challenge that people then think, well, what am I meant to make of this day? Because you spend it either feeling guilty that you're doing more than you feel you should, or you're bored because you feel restricted that you can't do all these other things. So I think that for me, there is this question that runs all the way through it, which is, what is it that brings you life? Because of course, that's the other part of the title. There's the infusion, but infusion with what? And if Sabbath is this space where you can be infused with the life of God, well, that life might look very different to you than it does to me, or it does to another person. So what is it that brings you life? How has God created you? For some people, it's getting out in creation, going for a walk. And I know, Kenny, you know, you and I and Sharon and Bex, we've walked a lot together. And, you know, I think that for some people, that's great. It brings them life. For other people, that is not life. And, you know, but there may be something else that brings them life. And so it's having that self-awareness to know, who has God created me to be, and what is it that allows me to receive the life that he has for me? And then how can that be part of a rhythm in my life that blesses me and brings God's life to me? And that for me is Sabbath. And I don't think that's just crammed into a one-day period. I think that needs to punctuate our lives, you know, all the way through.
Yeah, and as you say, it's about being intentional in that pursuit, and not being necessarily passive, because a lot of Christianity we spend as passive and not seeking out. And we'll go on a little bit to talk about rhythms in just a moment. But I was really struck. So you, as I say, this is theological, and you start off the book by looking at, you know, creation, and then in chapter 3, you know, almost takes this change of pace. And it's one of those ones where, you know, I think when reading scripture, you know, sometimes we can just gloss over something. We can just go, you know, Jesus was born of a virgin. Yeah, okay, we know that. And you go, what? Hold on a minute, stop. And one of those ones is, you know, in the creation account where it, you know, it talks about God on the seventh day resting. And when you kind of wrote that, and when the pace changed for me, that caused me to kind of sit up and to take notice of that again. Because, you know, it's like we read, you know, 6 days he created, you know, the fish and the da-da-da, and then the seventh day he rested. But it's like, that's really epic. That is major. You know, God, the creator, the eternal one, described as Yahweh, the great I am, who has got no beginning, no end, rests. And that's a concept of God that perhaps we need to reflect in our own lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is that. And we do kind of gloss over that, because for those 6 days of creation, we see activity. You know, we see stuff bursting forth from nothingness, and then it seems that there's just this paragraph, very short paragraph, that's given to, on the seventh day God rested from all the work of creation that he had done, and so on. And I remember reflecting on the story of my brother-in-law, Fraser, who ran the London Marathon. And we were going on a family holiday up to North Yorkshire, which is where my family roots are from. And he was due to meet us up there, having run the London Marathon. And he ran the London Marathon, and then he drove from London up to North Yorkshire that day and arrived, in the very early hours of the morning. And then the next day, we were going around a National Trust property up in North Yorkshire. And literally, I had to push him around in a wheelchair because his legs had just gone, having done the marathon and then that long drive up there. And, you get this impression almost that you read it, that God was somehow worn out, or at least that's the kind of almost unspoken impression there is in Genesis, that God was worn out from the act of creating and therefore he rested. But of course, God doesn't get tired and weary in the same way that we do. So what is it about this moment where God rests? And we've talked about intention for us, but of course God is a God of intention as well, that God intentionally chooses to create this space of rest, because God ultimately wants us to do what he does, to be like him. And so God creates this space, ordains this space for us to enter into as well as him. That God is not asking you to do something that God himself is not prepared to do, which is that if God can rest, if God takes that time, not even needing it to rest, then how much more do we need to enter into that space as well, to rest?
Yeah, and it's just this, again, as you say, this intentionality of God's part to say, just go and do likewise. And sometimes we overthink stuff and we change the goalposts, don't we, on what, on how we should be as created beings living our lives.
Yeah. And it humbles us as well, that's the other thing that just jumps into mind, that, if you're sat there going, I'm really busy. Well, have you created mountains today? Have you created giraffes and spoken light into existence? Because God did all that and he still had time to rest. So that report that you've got to write, maybe that can wait until Monday or till tomorrow, and you can take some time to rest. So it kind of humbles us and knocks us down a bit as well. That
how many blue whales did you make today?
Actually,
that's cute. You speak in the book about still sticking with the subject of creation for a moment. You speak about this chaos and order. And let me just read you a little section of what you say. It says, most of us live our lives with a certain amount of chaos, or at least it feels that way. And as the father of younger children, single figure ages for some of them, I can sympathise with your words there. You go on to say, we can choose to live in the undefined void of chaos, or we can choose to be rooted in the patterns and harmony of God's creativity. Creation itself is a witness to those patterns, and we can learn a great deal about how to live in a fast-paced world by reflecting on them. And you go on in the book later on and you draw out the story of Mary and Martha, and how, so often we can be Marthas and, busying ourselves, and take our eyes off of spending time with Jesus. And I know for myself, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, I know for myself, I wake up in the morning and I've got my stuff to do, my things that I need to get done, and I run straight away into ticking those boxes sometimes. Do you have any advice, other than reading the book, how we can set practically a better rhythm to kick off our days and to start that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the first thing is to say that when you read that story of Mary and Martha, and Jesus visiting the house in Bethany, there is again this traditional narrative that sort of pits work against rest, and I think that that's a kind of a false choice, really, because work is important. We believe that God has given us work. We believe that God has gifted us to work and to do and to have activity. But God has also given us rest. And it's important to discern when the moments for work and when the moments for rest are. So part of the issue, I think, with Mary and Martha was that not that work is bad, but that this wasn't the time for work, that this was the time to sit at Jesus's feet. This was the time to listen and to be still. And that's part of the thing we need to think about when we're thinking of rhythm is what is the time for work and what is the time for rest, because everything in that pattern of creation has a time for rest. Even plants have what we call circadian rhythms, so they're rhythms of activity and rest based on when the light is there. So when it's light, generally things, plants, animals, people have activity. When it's dark, we kind of shut down a bit and we rest and we sleep and we regenerate. So everything that God has made has that. We have seasons that reflect that. Now we're in winter, which is traditionally seen as the season of darkness, of rest, of inactivity, where we're huddled. I'm literally huddled over the heater in my study at the moment because it's very cold and we've not turned the heating on in the rest of the building. So it's kind of saying what are the periods in my life where I need to rest? What are the periods where I need to work? And making sure that you have those in your life in proportion, So one of the rhythms that I have, for example, in my day is that I will work 2 out of 3 periods of the day. So if you define a day as morning, afternoon, and evening, I will work 2 of those in a day. So if I'm working in the evening, I will take either the morning or the afternoon off because I know that I'm working in the evening. Now, some people would choose to work all the way through. What I would say is, does that give you the balance of work and rest? So it's finding something that works for you, but something that can hold intention. When is the time to work? When is the time to rest? That's the great thing in Ecclesiastes. There is a time to work and a time not to work, a time to rest.
Because it does, Scripture will talk about, and you talk about this in the book as well. It's, it's not you're constantly resting or you're constantly Sabbath rest, and that brings you closer to God. It's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, our work can bring us closer to God, And but it's about what the time is for that. And we live in a world where time is, we almost view it as the enemy. We constantly talk about how we don't have enough time to do this. If only there were more hours in the day. But then we're constantly driven by the fact that we have these time devices. I've got one on my wrist, I've got one on my phone, I've got one up on the wall in my study, and then I walk out the door and there's a massive church with a huge clock on the side of it. We live our lives constantly checking about time. And so it's about us saying, how can we be liberated from that drive and actually develop a rhythm which is reflective of both our work and our rest, but gives justice to both.
There's a command, isn't there, in Scripture that God puts our way. He doesn't put it our way. A command is a command. But it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And you, again, talk about this in the book. And I remember thinking when I was younger, because I equated Sabbath with Sunday, and again, we won't get into that discussion, but I remember thinking, well, that's the boring day. If I can just get over that hurdle, I can enjoy the rest of my time.
Yeah.
How do we get out of this way of thinking where it becomes just a chore, where rest and Sabbath rest in particular, where we take perhaps a period of time, a day often, to rest. How do we change our thinking in that?
I think it's important as well to look at how that original command was received by the people who received it, because, as they gathered by the mountain, God's people, having been slaves in Egypt for their whole lives, up until that moment, all those people who were there were born in slavery, and they grew up in slavery. And some of them would have spent significant proportion of their lives, maybe 50, 60 years, as slaves, and where they're worked to death, and they don't have a union that can, stand up for their rights, and they don't have, the ability to take sick days or what have you. So they come to the mountain, and what it must have been like for them to receive a command that says, on this day you will rest, written into the fabric of who you are, written into the very law that's going to govern you, is this provision for you to rest. What that must have been like for a people who had only experienced work, bone-breaking, back-breaking work for their whole lives. It was a freedom, it was a release for them. And yet somehow we've created, and sadly, we have a history as the church of doing this. We've taken something that God has given as a means of blessing, and we've turned it into a burden. And partly that is because, again, we try to define or over-define what that looks like, rather than saying, there are things in my life that feel like a burden. How is God releasing me for this period from that burden? So if I sit there and think, okay, well, for me, my work, a lot of it is, it's kind of either headspace, or it is, time with people, pastoral burdens, all those kind of things. What is God releasing me from that burden? Very often it's time with my family, it's time away from other people, it's time just out walking in creation, spending time with them. It's, the Message translation of Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, it's learning to live freely and lightly. So I think that firstly, it's realizing that Sabbath was never meant to be a burden. It was always meant to be a gift. It was always meant to be a means through which you could experience greater life. And if you're not experiencing greater life, then actually I would say you need to look at, why is Sabbath for me not about life? And maybe you need a different interpretation of Sabbath. Maybe you need a different rhythm of Sabbath, because it's very easy to take on, this almost like one size fits all. If you went to the doctor for swelling in your joint, and the doctor prescribed you with an anti-inflammatory, you'd think that makes sense. If you went with a broken leg and the doctor said, oh, here's some ibuprofen, you'd be a bit more concerned. If you don't expect a doctor to throw out a one size fits all prescription for every ailment. In the same way, take one day and do nothing is not a one size fits all prescription for the problems that we face in life. It will look different for each person depending on what the challenges are. So I would say that the main thing with Sabbath is that you take the time to really know how God has created you. And then to out of that space, maybe make a list of stuff. What would it look like? If I was designing Sabbath for myself, what would that look like? Means through which I can experience rest and life. And then look at that list and say, okay, well, actually, why don't I do some of these things on a Sabbath, or in those rest periods that I have in my week?
Andy, that is so helpful and so practical, and just really grounds it for us. It's thinking through, absolutely what that looks like. Just before we conclude, you talk about another subject contained within the whole subject of rest and intentionality. It's this whole thing of stopping. And you bring out the story of the Samaritan woman, and across the top of our church, is the verse from John 4, the Father seeketh such to worship him in spirit and in truth. And it's from that very same narrative. So we as a church, we love that story anyway. But Jesus takes a really intentional route to start off with. And I'm sure there was tons of stuff. You know, he was the Son of God. He had 3 years of ministry. I'm sure there was stuff that he could be getting on with. But he takes time to stop because he takes time for that woman. Is there something there that we can perhaps learn through that stopping that we can transfer through to our lives?
Yeah, I mean, again, there is that, you know, we talk about this phrase like the Protestant work ethic, don't we? Or even those sort of bumper stickers you get in cars that say, you know, look busy, Jesus is coming. I think it's that, it's kind of going against that, working in the opposite spirit to that. You know, Jesus, you know, the task of redeeming the world is not a small task, you know, and of all those people that there were around, or the people he was going to, there would have been plenty of need that he could have addressed. And yet Jesus takes this time to fulfill this basic need that he has to stop, to rest, to drink water. And through that, there comes this encounter with the Samaritan woman, and leads to this entire village, you know, hearing the good news, and many people coming to believe in Jesus. But none of that would have happened if Jesus had plowed on through. And there's this great quote that I talk about in the book that says, God has given me the gospel and the horse, but I've worked the horse to death, and now I have no way to deliver the gospel. And, you know, there is that sense in which, unless we take the time to rest, unless we take the time to stop, to allow the needs that we have as human beings to be met by God's gracious provision, then we don't have anything with which we can either work or share the gospel. You know, if you are, I mean, I actually saw, I don't know if I can get it up on the screen to show you, a picture recently, and it really challenged me because it was this picture of a phone. You know, when your phone battery gets low, there it is. I don't know if you can see that picture. So you'll be able to see it on the screen. It's got a picture of a battery on one side with that little red bit at the bottom where you've got a low battery. And it says, you wouldn't let this happen to your phone. And then next to it, there's this picture of a woman. And again, with just a little red bit by her feet. And it says, so don't let this happen to you either. Self-care is a priority, not a luxury. So if I don't want to let my phone run out of battery, how much more important am I to take care of? And of course, right at the heart of the gospel message we believe is that we are of worth. We are of value. You know, God loves you too much to allow you to settle for less than the best that he has for you. And the best that he has for you is that you would be infused with the life that he always meant for you to have, you know, life in all its fullness, life abundantly. And sure, there are going to be choices that you have to make. And actually, sometimes those choices aren't easy, but they are our choices to make. And you can have the enabling and the equipping of God's Spirit, but also the support of people around you. Be accountable to people and say, do you know what? I really struggle with this. I really struggle with getting that balance between work and rest right. Can I be accountable to you? Can you say to me, hey, have you taken time off this week? Have you had rest? What have you done to rest? Has that blessed you? You know, be accountable to people as well in that process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andy, this has just been so helpful and a real springboard for us as we look at this season. As you say, we're in the season of winter, January. Yeah. It's often a time of reset, and particularly when we enter this, you know, this next third lockdown that we're all just really sick and tired of. Perhaps maybe we can learn something in this season. Perhaps we can learn something about reset, afresh, that God perhaps wants to put into us. Maybe he's still got things that he wants to put rhythms into our lives, and let's not miss what God has got for us, as Andy's spoken about. I'm just going to get Andy in just a moment to read the last few paragraphs of the book. But if you do want to get a hold of this, Andy, how can they do that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that really blesses us as authors is when people buy a book direct from us, because we don't get a lot of royalties for books that are sold online, but we get a little bit more if people buy it direct from us. So I've got a bunch of copies of the book, which I'm happy to sign for people. And so if you want to send me an email, and Kenny, you might be able to put the email address up on the screen, send me an email. Let me know if you want to get a copy, and if you want me to sign that, make it out to someone. And if you let me know your address, if you live in Bath, then I'm happy to drop that through your door, and I can give you the details of how to pay for that as well. But that would be a huge blessing to me.
Yeah, and if you don't have access to email or whatever, please feel free to, if you're getting this DVD later, please feel free to give me a call, or give Dawn at the office a call, and we can arrange with Andy for that copy to go out. If you want that signed, that's absolutely fine. I can make contact with Andy. Andy, Mr. Prolific Author, it is an absolute privilege to do life with you. You've got another few books out. Are they all by authentic publishers?
Yeah, so the first one was a book called When Rain Falls Like Lead, which is about Where Is God Will We Suffer. That was by Paternoster. They're a subsidiary of Authentic. The new book is called Made to Belong, and that is out next month, and that's with Authentic as well. So yeah.
Cool. So the first one about bereavement, this one about rest, and the third one about belonging. Yeah. I would highly recommend, I've read the first book and I've read this book. I would highly recommend those titles to you. As I say, Andy's got a really genuinely good way of writing and putting stuff across that would take me 200 words to say that he can just really simply say in 20 words. Just a real gift of being able to craft words. Andy, just read that last little bit for us, because we're going to end up where we began, which is the whole thing of balance and rest.
Sure. God's desire for you is not to be bound up in religion, to be set free from one chain only to tie yourself up with another. His desire for you is freedom, is life that is full and lasting and nourishes you deep within. It is life that will truly give you rest as it infuses every part of you. It is life that will enrich your waking and sleeping, your working and resting, your coming and going. It is a rest that he delights in, that he brought into being, that he longs for it to be a delight for you too. From the source of all things, from the beginning, this has always been true. It is the whisper of the Spirit hovering over the waters. It is the fingerprint of creation rustling through the trees. It is the voice of wisdom calling in the marketplace. When we connect with these things, we root ourselves in the deepest truths of the cosmos. We find life. Life in the one who, in the wisdom of God, who calls throughout the ages to tired and weary ones, come to me, and I will give you rest.
Andy, thank you so much for your time. Maybe one day we'll have a discussion about belonging or bereavement.
I'm delighted to.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and speak to you soon, mate.
Bless you, mate. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
When peace like a river taken from me, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my Lord thou hast taught me to say, it is though Satan should buffet, though trials may come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless state and has shed his own blood for my soul. For it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious fall. My sin not in part, but the whole was nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. For it is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. 'Cause you are the rock on which I stand. By your grace, it is well. My hope is sure with Christ my Savior. It is well with my soul. You are the rock on which I stand. By your grace, it is well. My hope is sure with Christ my Savior. It is well with my soul. And oh Lord, it's for thee, for thy coming we wait. The sky, not the grave, is our goal. Oh, trump of the angel, voice of the Lord, blessed hope, blessed rest of my soul. For it is It